There is a legal disclaimer for this episode. The views expressed in this episode are solely those of the guests and do not reflect those of the host or this podcast. Some claims relate to legal matters where courts have not ruled in the guest's favour. This podcast and its hosts do not verify or endorse any allegations. Listeners should conduct their own research and seek professional advice where necessary. There are multiple trigger warnings for this episode. We're talking about forced adoption and also traumatic birth stories, as well as some other stuff. You made the decision. If you want to listen, I hope you do. It's an important story to tell.
These people are admitting, that they were actually kidnapping babies.
And you kept asking for your baby. What was the response when you were asking to see your baby?
Well, I don't know why they kept me locked up. They changed the babies' names and they put them in certain parts of the hospital. They hid them.
In the 1960s, today's guest was caught between the rise of women's lib and a society that punished young women for breaking its moral codes. At 16, she was incarcerated in a Magdalene Laundry, and the child she was carrying was taken from her at birth. She is one of an estimated 150,000 Australian women subjected to forced adoption. Decades later, in 2013, the then Prime Minister Julia Gillard apologised on behalf of the Australian Government to people affected by forced adoption or removal policies and practices. Today's guest shares her fight for justice. Episode 125, Lily Arthur. The One Moment Please podcast.
Yeah.
Hi Lily, thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Hello, Fiona. Thanks for inviting me.
Now, I was very lucky to read and get an advance copy of your book, Prisoner of the State. It's released due to be released in February. It reads as a cross between a thriller, a horror, a Hollywood movie, and when you realise it is actually your life story, it is shattering to the soul that women and girls went through what you did, which was forced adoption. Thank you for being so brave in terms of writing the book and coming on and discussing your story. What made you put it to paper?
Well, I started off writing it probably about 40 odd years ago. And it was just like a jigsaw when you first started jigsaw puzzle. And then you know that there's a picture there somewhere, but you've got to find the pieces that put it all together to understand it or see what it was. And I started writing it, various chapters like my background and then a progression through my life, and nearly each chapter was 1 decade of my journey, and um, it just seemed to never end. It was a book that was never going to be finished. So you know, I thought if I started putting it down, then the son that I lost one day will maybe read it and it'll explain a lot of things to him. So that was the motive in the first part.
You say the word lost, but he wasn't really lost. He was forcibly taken from you. And I'll just read a stat that you put in the book that between 1940 and 1960s, 250,000 were affected by this.
There's
And you were
quite a large
17.
number, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And you were 17 and engaged at the time as well to be married when you were pregnant. Can you
I
take
was.
us? Can you take me back to when this all
Mm.
first happened?
I I
Because
was just gonna have a drink of water first. I'm
that's
getting a
fine. I
tickly
would have
throat.
to take a drink of water too if I was going to relive this story too, Lily.
Sorry about that.
You were madly in love with Steve, with a guy called Steve, pregnant. How far along were you when you woke up to police standing over your bed?
I was barely 6 weeks pregnant. I'd only just found out that, that I was pregnant. It just all seemed to happen in the space of a week, and started getting morning sickness, and that was a signal, like I was going to work and I was getting sick. I used to work in a mattress factory as a machinist there. I started getting sick, and then, I think the boss asked me, uh, "Are you pregnant?" And I said I was, and then they fired me. And I went home that afternoon. It was like, wow, I've lost my job. And it wouldn't have been, it would have only been a matter of days before the police came walking into my bedroom while I was asleep. we were living in an old Queenslander, and the bedroom was actually right next to the front door. So I sort of got uh, shaken awake, and I just see these brown legs in front of me. And they got me out of bed, and it was the police. And then they started questioning me, but I thought they'd come there for a complaint about the noise, because my son's father, Steve, was practicing with an acoustic guitar, not electric one, practicing with an acoustic guitar with his mate in the kitchen.
Because he
They
was a
were,
musician.
he was a musician, and he was getting ready to go into a new band. And then they just took me out to the kitchen and questioned me, you know, various questions, how old I was, where were my parents. And it was a month off my 17th birthday. So anyway, they said to me, well, we're going to have to take you into custody. If you'd have been a month older, there wouldn't have been anything that we could have done. So it was like, wow, what the hell? Anyway, they made me get dressed, and they took me down to the watch house, the South Brisbane watch house. And that's where they booked me into the cell. Well, actually, the sergeant there at the desk said, what are you doing bringing her here? You get hung for doing that. And they said, well, it's getting a bit late, too late to take her anywhere, because I suggested that they take me to a friend at Runcorn. And this was, down there at Rocklea. And they said I was too far, too late at night. So anyway, they decided that they were going to leave me, put me in a cell in the watch house.
Now,
And
this comes in important later because, A, why that comment was significant in regards to you shouldn't have brought her here, and two, that they're your age. So we're jumping ahead a little bit, but you found out later that they weren't able to actually arrest you at that point. So it was an unlawful
well,
arrest.
they charged me with being exposed to moral danger. So, I didn't know what that meant. It's like, wow, what does that mean?
Mm.
Anyway, and I thought, oh, if I committed a crime, and he said to me, no, you haven't committed a crime, but if you'd have been a month older, there's nothing we could do about it. Not, I didn't understand it. And
So
then
they were saying that you were at danger from Steve.
basically, yeah, because I was living with him.
Why did they put you in the cells then? And why was the watch commander saying you shouldn't have brought her here?
Well, they put me in the cells because they had nowhere to take me. And I stayed overnight in the cell. And the next morning, they brought me before the children's court and had me charged with being exposed to moral danger. And yet there was two justices of the peace, that just said to the police or whatever, take her to, somewhere. I didn't know where they were going to take me. And then I found out it was a place called Holy Cross in Wooloowin. And then uh, they remanded me more or less for a week till they could find my parents. My parents had just moved down to Sydney, and wasn't real sure. They were in a caravan because they moved down there in a caravan, and they were waiting to find a house to rent. So anyway, they said come back in a week and see if you can find her parents. But a week later, when I went back to court again, they said that no, they couldn't trace my parents. So I was committed indefinitely to Holy Cross at Wooloowin, which is
So
an industrial school for girls.
so when you say they charged you, you were up on charges. That's what confused me in regards to the book because I thought that they were charging you with a crime, but they
Of being
charged you even
exposed.
though it wasn't a crime?
I was being charged or whatever, or held, um, because they deemed that this is all I got was what had I done? Oh, well, I was exposed to moral danger. I hadn't committed any crime, and I didn't find out later, until much later, years and years later, when I was studying law, that the age of consent was 16. That meant 16 in one day, not 16 and 11 months, because I was of marriageable age. I wasn't, I was allowed to get married, and my son's father, during the time that, I was waiting for to go back to court, he'd been to Sydney and got my parents' permission and his parents' permission to get married. So in effect, like, um, I was living in I was over the age of consent. I was living in a de facto relationship with the father of my child, and it was my intention, our intention, to get married. So, it's just like I don't think they knew what they were doing, or I still can't understand why. They just didn't open the door and let me go, because even when I turned 17, a month later, there was still no reason to keep me incarcerated. So, I thought, well, when I turned 17, which is a month later, I'll just walk out of here. You know, they said, if I'd have been a month older, they couldn't have done nothing. So I turned a month older. So, I was still locked up. And I couldn't understand that. Nobody told me anything, the reason why. I was still being held a prisoner there. And I was a prisoner. There's no two ways about it. If you're
So
locked
that was
up and
going to
you
be my
can't get out.
question. Let's talk about the conditions that you were finding yourself in Holy Cross. So it was 1967. What would be the definition of the Holy Cross? Would it be they were a nunnery? Like what
No,
way
it
would
was
girls home?
actually, it started off in the 1890s as a Magdalene Laundry, where, young women or older women, whatever, um, went to get some sort of, I suppose, protection or escape from, society, or, they were pregnant. So the nuns used to take them in and sort them out, I suppose, if you could say that, by doing the washing, other people's dirty washing. You know, if you look at the thing, it was to aid the wayward and erring. That's the definition of it. But it was actually originated from the Magdalene Laundries in Ireland, where they put, people like myself into these places and locked them up, made them work, to be kept. But I was a ward of the state. The state was my guardian when they put me into that place where they forced me to work. And it took a long time for me to get my head around that. But the state was in collusion with the Catholic Church to keep people like me locked up and incarcerated and forced to work for no wages.
And
And
that's an
when you think
interesting
about it, it's quite shocking, isn't it? When you
it
think
is.
about that.
And you were a ward of the state because they said that they couldn't find your parents. Your parents had moved from Brisbane down to Sydney and um I mean Steve
They
ended
did
up
find my
finding them.
parents eventually. They did
Yeah.
find my parents, and then they knew where my parents were, but I still wasn't let go.
Mm.
Even after, they, signed the consent to get married, I had to go down to the office, and the nun said, "Oh, you better sign these forms so you can get married." And I knew Steve had been to Sydney because I saw my parents' permission, and I knew it was only a matter of time before he was going to come along, and we could leave and go and get married. But that didn't eventuate, and I often wondered, over the years, why he never came back. And I did find out later on that he did come back, and they wouldn't give him the papers, and they told him, the nun said, "You're too young to get married," and that was it. He wasn't allowed to see me. He wasn't allowed to have any contact with me at all.
And that is a common theme throughout the book that people that were coming to visit you, but they were being withheld. That information was being withheld from you.
There were people that had to apply to, they had to get permission to come and visit me, right? And I've actually got a list of the people that came to visit me and when they came. So they had to apply to come and visit me. But the only person that was left in Brisbane was my sister, my older sister, Janet. And she had to apply to come and, you know, get permission to come and see me on a Sunday. The visiting hours were on a Sunday afternoon. So a couple of women came from my work, and one of them would, you know, tell me the updates of what's happening with Steve. I think she may, and he swears to God that she was the one that dobbed me in to the welfare,
Mm.
you know. But they only visited me about 3 or 4 times at the most. And
Describe the conditions that you were living in on sort of a day-to-day situation.
well, I was living in that very old Victorian 3-story building. There's like one long dormitory up where we were. They had steel gates at the end of it and bars on the windows. You know, we were only allowed to go up there at night time. So through the daytime, we had to, get up at 5, 6 o'clock in the morning if they made us go to mass, and then probably get up around about 6:30, 7 o'clock or something in the morning, get dressed and go to breakfast. And then, when you finish breakfast, I had to, each of us had a chore to do. I had to do half of the recreation hall, clean it, and that. And then after we did that, we'd go and do the 8 hours in the laundry, and then, stop for lunch and then go back. And, we had to finish the load. They had to make sure that all the loads were finished for the day. So you might go a bit longer than 5 o'clock. And then you'd have your meal, and then you'd have to sit around for an hour or two or whatever till it was time to go to bed about 8 o'clock. And that was the day on a Friday. On a Friday evening, they had a movie in the recreation hall, and we were given 30 cents worth of lollies, to watch the movie, whatever. The little shop in one of the rooms down near the office, down on the bottom floor where the recreation hall was, and there was a kitchen down near the toilets adjoining the laundry. So on a Saturday afternoon or morning, whatever, we used to have to learn to cook in the kitchen. So that's what Saturday mornings were. So Friday nights were a movie or two. Saturday mornings were like cooking in the kitchen, and the rest of the day was just nothing. And Sundays was just sitting around. We still had to do the daily chore, like cleaning the other half of the recreation hall. But Sunday was just sitting around waiting to see if you're going to get a visitor, because you never knew if anyone was coming. So if somebody came, you were very lucky.
In the book, you go into more detail. I don't think that description probably does it justice compared to what you put in the book about how horrific it was. The violence amongst the girls, mental abuse, I would say, that you describe in the book as well, um, from being in the institution, does not sound. Sounds horrific.
Well, that was, I mean, that routine that, like we went through, or I went through personally, was just like you're walking around in like a daze, just going about doing these things. You're conditioned to do them. But like when I got to the point where, I suppose when after I turned 17, and I'm still there, I'm waiting for somebody to spring me out of the place, and nobody came. And I think there was a point where I think my mind just snapped, and it was like you're going through this process, and you realize that no one's going to come and rescue you, and it's like this impending fear that you don't know what's going to lay ahead of you, like am I ever going to get out of this place, or I'm going to be locked up here? Because there's a lot of old women there too, that have been there for a long time, and there's some disabled women there as well. So that they were there for life. But, it was this fear of what was going to happen, what was going to happen to the baby. And, you know, it's very difficult, particularly when you sort of like don't know what your fate's going to be. And then you're going up to bed every night, right? And then they'd lock the steel gates at each end of the dormitory, and then as soon as the nun went, I think she slept somewhere down there, I'm not sure. There was a room there where the nun was supposed to sleep. And once the lights and everything went out, that's when all the fun started. For some, anyway. You know that,
Mm.
that some of the older, I wouldn't say older girls, they were all younger than me. I was the oldest state ward there, but some of the more hardened girls used to be very sadistic and, very brutal towards some of the younger ones that, looked like they probably, you know, were fairly innocent. So, there was a lot of, violence going on when the
Yeah.
lights were turned off. And we all knew that, well, I didn't say we all knew, but I suppose we probably did all know, you know, uh, there was something nasty going on in the toilets, up the end of the dormitory. And I later found out that, there was a group of girls that were actually sexually assaulting some of the younger ones. They would have been there from, say, about 14, 15. So, there was one small girl that was very timid sort of thing, and they used to focus on her, which wasn't very nice. But the problem was, if you said anything, you know, they'd get you when the lights were out. And
Mm.
I didn't get involved in any of it because I was the oldest one there and I was pregnant. And I think that may have done something to protect me, I suppose, in one sense. So they more or less uh, gave me a wide berth. But some of the others weren't so lucky. And this was one of the things that I brought up the Royal Commission for Sexual Abuse in Institutions, that this was going on. Once that gate was locked of a night time, we were left to fend for our own, devices, whatever. If the because they used to smoke up in their roof, in between the floors, there was a crawl space or something, and then to get up there, you know, of the night time and smoke in over the top of the toilets. We're lucky with the place never caught on fire; we'd have been burnt alive, And anyway, there was a lot of stuff going on when the lights went out.
Did anyone ever talk to you about how long you were going to be there?
No, had absolutely no idea. I thought when the baby was born, I would have been 17 and a half about that time when he was born. And I thought, well, they'll let me go. But just before, it would have been, I don't know, it wasn't long before I was due, another girl came into the home and she was pregnant as well. And anyway, she told me that they were going to get her a place to stay, and she was keeping the baby and everything. I thought, well, that's going to happen to me because it happened to her. They sorted her out. So I thought, well, that's going to happen to me as well. And then we can get married and all this sort of stuff. And but I got a different experience. I did.
I've just got no words, Lily, to be honest. In terms of when you went into labour, you were whisked away to hospital, and it was a very I'll just repeat that. You were whisked away to hospital. My cat meowed in the middle of that. um, I think he also wasn't happy with that. You talk about how invisible you felt and how everyone around you, from the medical staff to the social workers, everybody was treating you as an invisible person. They didn't speak to you. They didn't make eye contact with you. Uh, Are you comfortable talking through of what that birth experience was like?
Well, it was horrific.
Mm,
I didn't have any idea of what it actually involved because I wasn't, given any lessons, or any idea. I mean, my mother had 9 children. So I thought, well, it can't be too bad. She had 9 kids. And then I thought, well, uh, I'm just going to have the baby. And that was it. But when I actually got into the labor ward and the things that they were doing to me, like I wasn't prepared for that. And, it's like they broke my waters, which I didn't have any idea about that at all. And, gave me an enema and all that sort of stuff. And, that wasn't part of what I thought, I was going to go through. And then it's like they never really spoke to you, just roll over and, and you wonder what the hell's going on. And during the actual labor, when I started getting labor pains, there was no telling me how to breathe or, what to do. You just had to, somebody shouting, do this, do that at you, like, and you weren't prepared for the violence of what was being inflicted upon you. And it was just like, wow, is this what it was all about? I thought I was going to die anyway. Through the actual labor, um, when the baby was just about to come, um, they turned me over on my right side and put my left leg up into a stirrup on the side of the bed. And then, I was in a sort of sideways running position, and they pulled my right leg behind me. And I gave birth to my son with my face pushed into the mattress, not being able to move. And they felt like they were breaking my back. And I was screaming to them, you're breaking my back. And, I was sort of like held down. And then when my son was born, he was whisked out of the labor ward. But, I was left there like the bloody, like a dead animal. Anyway, they came along and stitched me up. I had no idea that, that they'd cut me so much. They had to stitch me inside and out. And it was like nobody said anything to you. It's like roll over and do this and do that. And the agony of being sewn together, like them.
no
I was only,
anaesthetic.
well, if there was, there wasn't any, mask or anything.
Yeah.
They were injecting needles up inside of me. So, it's just that the pain was excruciating. And anyway, after they finished with me, I just was wheeled into a ward, which I found out later was called the heartbreak ward. That's where all the unmarried mothers went. And that's where I stayed for the, you know, duration of my incarceration in the hospital because I couldn't go
Mm.
anywhere, didn't have any clothes.
And you
But
kept asking
anyway,
for your baby. What was the response when you were asking to see your baby?
well, we're just told that you can't see the baby until the social worker or the department worker came along and spoke to you. So I was waiting for days, wondering when this woman was going to come and have a talk to her. I thought I'd be getting my stuff and getting out of the hospital and leaving the home. That's how naive I was at the time.
Mm.
But she did eventually come on the 8th day, and she knew that I got in contact with Steve while I was in there. I don't particularly remember exactly how. I think I may have rang my sister who got in contact with him. I'm not sure. I was so drugged out of my head. I was just walking around in a daze. So there's some things that, I don't exactly remember how I got in contact with him. He might know, a bit more than I do, but I think my sister must have rang him up where he worked or something and told him that I'd had the baby. He came twice. I don't remember the second time. I remember the first time that that they'd found out, that the department found out that he'd been there to see me, and when she came to take my consent, um, she told me that I could be taken off to this a psychiatric institution where all the bad girls went, because I wasn't allowed to see him. And anyway, that's when the coercion and the and the threats and everything else started, to get me to sign the adoption consent.
So
But
at this point, you're 8 days post delivery and you still haven't been allowed to see your child. The other thing that they did was, well, you talk about the medication that they gave you. Now, it was a medication that had been pulled in America, but it was still allowed to be given in Australia. Talk to me about that medication that they were giving you, in addition to to the other stuff.
well, I wasn't exactly sure what it was.
Mm,
It was stuff to dry up my milk, but I
mm.
didn't know much about that at all. So, there's research going on about that issue. So I'm not really au fait with the effects of anything like that. I was unaware about anything, like that at the time. So, I was given, other drugs as well.
Mm.
So it was like a cocktail of different things that kept me very docile, I suppose, in one sense. They didn't tell you. You just got a nurse would come and give you a medicine, little cup with the tablets and whatever in it. Then you had to take it. And they stood there while you did it. And then, of course, you had to have the ray lamp, on your stitches. So I did that for 8 days.
A ray lamp, as in like a heat lamp.
Yeah,
Oh god.
to melt your stitches. You had to lie there with it between your legs.
How horrific.
Well, that's what they did. I don't know if it was the sign the days or whatever it was, but that's was the story with it. Yeah, if you had stitches, you had to get the ray lamp.
Ex just, talk me through the paperwork that, was brought into you.
The paperwork. Well, there was a woman that came in about the fourth day. I mean, you know, um, I don't remember much about that. It was only when I actually saw it decades down the track. But she was like a registrar in a hospital that came and took your details, your name, address, whatever, and the rest of it. The father's description, my description. Is he going to support the baby, whatever, to register the child. And anyway, she came and took those particulars because they had to register the baby. And that was it until the social worker came, or the department worker. They weren't social workers, they were just people that worked in the child welfare department. She came on the 8th day and uh, got me to sign the adoption consent, which actually had the wrong name on, had my wrong name on. I had my wrong address. Uh, what else? It had, what else was it?
Or
Just basically,
did they list the
it never
father?
listed my, no, it didn't list the father. He didn't have anything to do with signing the consent, but it was just my address where I'd never lived before in my life. It's where my mother was living at the time, but they didn't have it. I was still incarcerated at Holy Cross. But I mean, the consent, I signed the wrong name.
You asked for
That's how much
Steve
knows.
in the book, you write that you asked for Steve's name to be put down as father because they had it listed as
Yeah,
unknown, and
that
they
was
said
on
to
the
you And they
That was
refused.
on the it was on the, registration papers to register him as the father. But I couldn't put his name down on there because he hadn't consented to it. That's why it came up as unknown.
What do
When
you
they're
mean he
filling
had to
in to
because what
well,
do you
he had
mean
to
that
consent to have his name on my son's birth certificate. His original birth certificate doesn't have Steve's name on it, it's only got my name on it.
okay.
But
I haven't
that
had
you
kids,
I
so
could
is that a usual thing that the father has to consent?
yeah,
Okay.
they have to consent to, being named on the birth certificate because he was illegitimate. It was only my name that, would have been allowed. I did it years later. I got his name. I had to get him to, consent to having his name on my son's birth certificate, which he did. He signed the consent, and, I eventually got my son's father's name on the birth certificate, about 30 years later.
When I was
So
reading
my
it,
son's
I
a ve
wondered whether or not they were saying that they wouldn't put it on there because it meant that then they had to convince another party to, give up parental rights.
That's right. That's why
Yeah.
they never had a that father's name on there.
Mm.
But, my son has actually got 3 birth certificates. He's got one of his original birth certificate, which is my name on it. He's got, his adoption birth certificate that says that these people gave birth to him. And when I found him, I got, Steve's name on it, so his father's name is on the birth certificate now, as it should have been in the first place. But as far as the law would be concerned, right, for a, for an adoption, if the father's name was on the birth certificate, then he had to give consent to the adoption. Because it wasn't there, he didn't have to.
Mm.
It was only my name. But I mean, if you look at the legislation and everything that goes way back, you know, um, they if their name goes on the birth certificate, they were responsible for maintenance and all sorts
Mhm.
of things. But, they had to get my son registered, right, to make him exist, because if he didn't get registered, he didn't exist, so you can't adopt a child that doesn't exist. That's why they needed to get my baby registered so that he could be adopted, put up for adoption 4 days later. That was on the 4th, and all that wet paperwork went into those, it went into the department, then it went into the Register of Births, Deaths and Marriages. They did a report of investigation on me, which took, this woman, did, which under the Infant Life Protection Act, every house or wherever, every residence where an illegitimate child was born had to be reported to the state. So, it was compulsory, otherwise, they'd be fined, whatever. So the hospital made the report out and sent it to the Child Welfare Department that my son had been born on the 1st of September, and it had to be done within, 4 days or something. But that was alerting the state that an illegitimate child was born, and, that it was like I said, it was a report of investigation, so they came out to investigate why that child was illegitimate. But, it gave, my address, my hair colouring, all this sort of stuff, description of me, description of him, and down the bottom of it, of the form, and they even gave my mother's wrong name. My mother's name is Lily, and they gave the name Felicia on it. So they didn't even get their 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 information correct. But down the bottom, it had baby for adoption with a question mark. So the report is saying from the hospital to the Department of, Child Welfare was saying, "Is this baby for adoption?" When nobody had even asked me. So they're asking the department, "Is the baby for adoption?" Not after me not being allowed to see him and not asking me, was I gonna adopt him out, I would have said no. But all this was going on. I didn't know any of this was going on until I got some paperwork from them.
Well,
And you
you even
start seeing
found
a
out
picture.
afterwards. You write in the book that you found out afterwards that there was, that they they kept the babies in a completely separate area of the hospital.
That's right, and that was through my court case when these people in the hospitals and the department workers, gave evidence.
Mm.
They changed the babies' names, they gave them alias names, and they put them in certain parts of the hospital, they hid them. And then, the registered nurse that was, called to give, evidence in my court case said that they were not allowed to more or less have anything to do with babies for adoption. They were the property of the child welfare department. So they weren't even allowed really to do anything, to those children, not allow anyone to see them or anything. They were hidden away. But, you know, I mean, it all came out in my court cases like, wow, these people are admitting, that they were actually kidnapping babies and hiding them, giving them false names in the hospital. And the social worker that uh, I call them social workers, some of them had it, some of them had some training. Most of them, yeah, the people that worked in the department, like the consent takers, were ex midwives and the rest of it. And, you know, but they never even bothered to, really read up on the law, about me being the sole legal guardian of my child until I signed an adoption consent. I was under the law. I was allowed to see him, hold him, do whatever I wanted to, name him, whatever. Wasn't their job, not mine. That was not
Mm.
their job. It was my job to do that.
Do we have to say alleged coercion because of the court case outcomes?
I don't know. I call it. She was uh, even just by even by the paperwork. That paperwork was not correct. You
Mm.
you can't force someone to sign something, while you've got them imprisoned, and saying that they gave, a willing consent. I did study law on,
Mm.
researched into the thing of consent. But the thing at the end of the day, the state was my guardian, and it had the responsibility of looking after my best interests, not sending someone in to coerce me, into signing an unlawful consent. I was a minor at the time. So that was never taken into consideration. A minor could not sign a contract or whatever without somebody there, an independent person witnessing it to make sure that she understood the nature of what she was signing. There was nobody there at that time when they were taking consents. These people were going on their own. And, if you read the transcripts from my court case from some of these departmental workers, you can see they were acting unlawfully by going and getting these consents without an independent observer, making sure that they weren't taken under duress, and while the person signing them was not under the influence of being drugged.
Mm.
But not only that, but they'd hidden the baby for 8 days when I had a legal right to go and see him. And you,
At
you
what
think to yourself,
Yeah.
how they ever got away with it? They got away with it for decades.
You write about the conversation that you had with them when they brought in the, adoption paperwork. People can read that in the book.
Yeah.
You once signed, you were very briefly, given access, I would say, is probably a very loose word, to your son. They sort of whipped him in for a few moments so you could
Well,
kinda see him.
after they got my consent, she asked me, "Do you want to see the baby?" Of course, I wanted to see it. Well, they got my consent, so there's no harm in me seeing the baby. So they gave me a card to hold up at the nursery window, right? And it had on it, "Baby McDonald not to be shown." I can still remember that. But they wheeled him over to the window for me to have a look through. And, I didn't even see his full face. I had him on his side, and I could only see part of his face. And that's it. I mean, when you think about how evil that is, right? You withhold a mother from her child for 8 days till you get her to the point where she's so broken that she would do anything to see her child, the child that they took off her and hid. Of course, and she thinks, well, they've told me I've got 30 days to get him back. Well, you think, well, I've got that opportunity of getting him back again. You play out or whatever you think until you get to a point where you can go and get your baby back. But after I saw him for about 5 minutes, they packed me up and sent me back to the home. And that afternoon, I was still under the influence of drugs, sitting there folding pillowcases in the laundry.
Did you ever find out why they sent you back to the home after you gave birth, considering you are now 17?
I still don't know why. I don't know why they kept me locked up after I turned 17.
Mm.
There was no reason to keep me locked up. I
Well,
was
it
I was
seemed
I was
very
able to get married.
suspicious in regards to the timelines that you talk about them withholding people from you for that 30-day period, and after that 30-day
Yep.
um,
I got the
period
list
was
of the
up.
visitors list.
Yeah.
I do. And I could tell when my sister was, stopped from seeing me. I think it was just offhand, I can't remember. It was about June or July or something. And then they allowed her to see me 6 weeks after I'd signed or 30 days, right? After I'd signed the adoption consent. So, the time had ran out. I'd lost the baby. My 30 days was gone. And then my sister came to see me and they told me that they were sending me home. So she came to see me just before they sent me home. And I went crooked up. I said, how come you haven't been to see me for months on end? She said, I wasn't allowed to. So when I got the dates and that of the visits from her and worked out, the 30 days when that was final. And then I worked out exactly 6 weeks later, after the signing of the consent, I was sent back. So it was a week to contact my parents in Sydney to to ask them if they're going to take me back, and a week to get a response, and then they put me on a plane. Now, if they were so worried or whatever about my moral situation, they could have hung on to me if they'd have wanted to till I turned 18. And that was a fear, like that they could arrest me for God knows what, you know, until I was 18. And I don't know why, because I hadn't committed any crime anyway. And imprison me again. So, it took me a long time to work these things out, what they were doing. They wanted the baby and they got him. And the thing was, after I lost the child, I couldn't go back and tell his father that I'd lost him. It was such a disgrace. My relationship with my son's father was, it was buggered, it was gone. And anyway, you know, I was like, I just couldn't work out what had been done to me until I started getting it one piece of paper, because they hid everything. They hid everything that had to do with me having a child, and even my state ward records. That they said was all destroyed in the floods of '76 or something. I can't remember the date on that one, but we had nothing. They turned us out of these hospitals that was not one piece of evidence to take a court case, um, or to find out what had happened to you, because they hid it all. Once it went under the Act, that was it. No one was ever allowed to see that story again, not until the laws changed in 1990.
Do you think that there was actually you talk in the book about you trying to find your documentation, you've just touched on it then about everything and that they had been destroyed or told that they'd been destroyed in a flood.
Yeah.
Do you believe that there was actually a flood that destroyed the paperwork? Or do you think they were
Well,
destroyed to hide evidence?
well,
People can make up their own
I could
mind.
say people would say that I was paranoid, but there was a funny thing, even when I questioned and questioned, you know, under disclosure when I was going to court case, I want my records. And of course, they were all destroyed. I don't know how many letters I've got from the department saying they were destroyed in the flood. But just before the court case, they come out with another piece of paper called an expected child for adoption. And that sort of gave a physical description of me and, my son's father and my interest, whatever. And they described my son as a nice little fair-haired baby, had my interest in that and his interest, whatever. But down the bottom of it, it said it said on that handwritten, he was offered to his adopted parents, right, on the day I signed the consent. Then a couple of days later, they paid the fee on such and such a date. And then on the 16th, I think it was 16th of September, they came and collected him. And even though we were um, told they can't get any information about these people don't know who you are, they were told who we were and the name of our child. They were sent a letter to go and view the child of so and so, and if you would like to, if you're interested in adopting them. So they knew the name of the mother, the name of the child, when they went to have a look at the baby to see if they wanted him. So much for the confidentiality. They all knew who we were. That's why my son's parents knew who I was when I had that article in That's Life magazine because they already knew my name.
We'll touch on that at a later date. You then left the hospital without your baby and understandably spiraled into to depression and really had a very I don't even know what to describe the next couple of decades. I mean, you were in an abusive marriage, very depressed, very controlled environment living with his family. You go into great detail in regards to that in the book as well. You tried to find Steve, you couldn't find Steve because he had moved. That was obviously pre-marriage.
I did run away from my husband about the fourth year into the marriage. I
Mm.
found out that he was infertile. So I left him because I was trying to fall pregnant. Just wasn't happening. And, you know, I thought, well, he's not going to give me children. So my sister and myself, a friend, I left him and went to Queensland because I thought, now I'm going to go and find my son. And I don't know, I think I was delusional or something. Anyway, I thought he was standing there on a corner, in the street waiting for me to come and rescue him. It wasn't until I got up to Brisbane and sort of drove around. I thought, I'm never going to find him here. Anyway, stayed in Brisbane for a while and I'd met a young fellow that I liked. Anyway, we both travelled back to, we're going to travel back to Sydney and the car that we had that belonged to my sister needed a new gearbox. And we went to this fellow's place and, got a gearbox done there. And when I was there, I was talking to this woman and she told me that, you know, used to hang around with bands and that, and I told her that, my son's father's name. She said, "Oh, I know him. Oh, he just married my best friend." So on my way back to Sydney, I'd found out that evening that he'd actually just got married, but 4 years later. So that was the end of that episode. I had to go back and, I suppose in one sense, I didn't face the music. I wasn't going to go back with my first husband. I didn't want to go back, and then, but I found out that I was pregnant, and then I thought, well, I better do something. I'll have to divorce him or something. Wrote him a letter that, I wanted to divorce and I was pregnant. But anyway, he met me in a park and then begged me more or less to go back with him, which I did do, which I should have never have done. That was sealing my fate for quite a long time, putting up
And
with
he
his
knew it wasn't his
abuse.
baby too.
Yeah, he did know it was his baby, but he promised to look after it. His dream was a little blonde-haired, blue-eyed baby girl, and I delivered him a little green-eyed, blonde-haired baby girl. So he said to me at the time, "If it's a boy, don't bother bringing it home."
Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty humiliating because I had to go back and face all of his family and everything, and everyone in the street, you know, that knew my sordid details of what was going on, and very humiliating.
You tried a number of times to get away with him, and he emotionally manipulated you to come back on multiple occasions, and that you do go into that in the book. At what point did you realize that you were gonna that you said, "I'm gonna make a concerted effort to try and find your son"? I know you'd kind of been looking, but you kind of went from kind of looking to football.
I put my name. I heard there was a register going on up in Queensland, so I put my name down on the register. I think it would have been about 21. No, he might have been a bit younger. I think when he turned 18, I found out that there was a register you could put your name down on. And I'm thinking, oh well, I'll put my name down on this register, and he might be contacting me. I would have thought, he was keen to be finding out, but I didn't know at that time. He never knew he was adopted anyway. So, that came and went. And then when I learned that the laws were going to change, and I talked my husband into allowing me to put my name down and apply for, my son's details. That's when I got the contact vetoed. I got a contact and an information veto. So I wasn't allowed to know anything about him. Only non-identifying information, which I didn't find that out till years later. They threatened me with 2 years jail and a fine if I tried to contact him. And he left a message for me saying, "I have parents."
Mm.
That's the three words that devastated my life. When I got that letter from the department and a blank sheet of paper saying this is what he wished me to know, I have parents, I was pretty much considering going driving myself under a truck.
I can
But
understand
anyway,
how you would end up in that mindset. What made you then
everything
disregard
broke
that?
down then. My whole marriage and everything broke down.
Yeah,
That was it. That was the end of everything, you know? I just moved into a new home. I was there for 5 months before I walked out the door and left. So, if your world can go to black and white in a second, that's what happened to me. I just walked out of everything.
what made you defy the information? So you were given the information that if you still tried to find him, you would be potential prison sentence. What made you defy that and go and find him anyway?
Well, I went to Queensland, lived up there for a couple of years after I walked out of my marriage. And I eventually went back to Sydney, and I actually took up a relationship with a very good friend of mine that I'd known for a long time, my husband. And he suggested, because I'd hurt myself in the job that I was doing, and he suggested that, I should do some studying. So I went to TAFE, and I was doing community welfare course. And I thought, well, I'll go and have a look at, we had to do group dynamics course in that. And I thought, well, I'll go and observe an adoption support group, an independent one. And that's when um, I was like, wow. I found out from the very first phone call, what they did to me was illegal. And that was it. I had to go and find out more. And I became a member of Origins. And from then on, when I found out, what had happened to me and the laws that they broke and everything else, I was like a wild animal. Nothing could contain my anger at that time. I thought, hey, they'd really done me over, that I was so, felt so, persecuted paying for all the sins that I'd committed, and everything else like that, and found out that they actually stole my child. And I thought nothing was going to stop me from finding him and telling him the truth about what they did to us. And that's when I sort of like started my campaign of trying to find him. And that was, I think it took me about 18 months after I joined Origins to find out that I was allowed to have his first name, nothing else, nothing else. And that's what I thought, well, I've got a first name now. I can actually go looking. I did do the That's Life article trying to reach out to him, but I could have been, like I could have been fined, or it was against the law anyway to get other vehicles to try and, reach out to the adopted kids that put on vetoes. But anyway, as soon as I found out his first name, that was it. I was off and running.
Well, often running in terms of you were scouring electoral school entries, like registers and electoral rolls, and all you had was a first name. Like, it's quite remarkable that you ended up finding him. Talk me through that process.
Well, when I found out his first name was Tim, I had that confirmed by the departmental woman. I said, his name is not Timothy. She said, no, his name is, I confirmed it, that his name was Tim, just Tim. And anyway, my husband and I and my daughter went down to the state library where they had physical copies of the electoral rolls of when he would have came of an age to vote. So we went through about 2.5 million of them, all southeast Queensland, looking for every Tim on the roll. Anyway, I think we had about 40 something Tims and Timothys, and we thought, well, my friend who was looking for her son, his name was David. That's all she got. She said, "Oh well, the school admission lists up in Queensland where they go to school, they have their name, date of birth, and that, and their address, whatever." And she said, "We can look through them. They're all in the archives." So anyway, we went up to Queensland, and I searched the electoral rolls of when he would have came on, and tried to eliminate, some of these people that whose names that we took up there with him. Anyway, after a couple of days, it looked like it was fruitless. I was simply going around and round in circles. Anyway, she found out when she was looking through the um, microfiche, at the school records. She comes out. This is on the third day. She comes out and says, "Oh, we found out there was only 6 books. There was only 6 books. She thought there was bloody hundreds of them." Anyway, she comes out and she said, "Oh, there's this boy named Timothy who was born on the 1st of September, uh, you know, and he's at such and such a place at Strathpine or somewhere." Anyway, so we took his details, and then she come out a few minutes later and said, "Oh, there's a boy named Tim who was born on the 10th of September." Was funny thing, my ex-husband was born on the 10th of September. So I said, "Oh, but they said his name was, they said this says that he was born on the 10th. My son was born on the 1st. Anyway, she said, "Oh, sometimes they change the date of birth." And I thought, "Oh, well, okay, we'll take them." So when we get to her mother's place, she rang up this um, Timothy who was born on the 1st of September. And he said, "No, it's not me, but I think my little mate across the road was adopted and he was born on the same day as me." So anyway, we thought, "Oh, well, you know, we'll check it out." So he checked it out and he rang me back the next day and said, "Oh, yeah, my sister said, yeah, he was born on the same day as me. And he lived across the road and he was adopted." So there was 2 Tims born on the same day in the same street in Strathpine. And when I went to visit this politician because we were having a parliamentary inquiry into adoption down in New South Wales, and I thought I might try and see if we can get some support to get one up there in Queensland. And I was talking to this politician anyway for about an hour and a half, and he told me about this young fellow named David who was a very angry adoptee. And I thought, well, that sounds familiar. And I remembered that I'd sent some some, articles from the Courier Mail because I did a bit of researching on why the laws had changed. And anyway, I saw a meeting notice for these parents who wanted adoption privacy. And there was a meeting being held, and the contact person was a David so and so. And I rang up my friend and I said to her, well, you ought to check this guy out. Could be your son. Anyway, by the time I finished talking to him, my mother and I went around to the electoral office and found out where Tim lived. And he lived up not far away from her in Caboolture. So I went home and got the journals that I made and took them around to his wife. And she was like a stunned mullet, when we turned up at the door and said, I think my son is your husband. Anyway, she took the journals that I made and then we waited all night. All these things were going through my mind. And the next morning he rang me up and said, I think you could stop looking. I think I'm your son.
Why did you not
Anyway, I
stay
met him.
around? Because she said to you he'll be back in a couple of minutes and you decided to leave and just leave the books. Why did you not stay around to meet him then?
Well, he was on his way home. He
Yeah.
was not far away. And just as I got out the gate of his driveway, he drove in. I didn't want him to see me. I wasn't prepared to front him like that. So anyway, I left the journals with her and gave her my phone number. I said, if they're not, if he's not my son, you can call me and I'll come and pick him back up again. But he did. He rang me the next day and said, I'm his son. And anyway, I met him a couple of hours later. And when the time I got home, my friend had rang this number on this meeting notice and found out that that was her son, David. That's all she had was his first name. So if you believed in God, how we found the two of them with only their first name basically on the same day. If you believed in God, you'd think it was an act of God,
Mm.
or as a miracle or something. Maybe it was destiny. I don't know. But I can't explain it. I can't explain why two people could find their children just with their first name and that on the same day with nothing else to go by, nothing at all. And I don't know. If you believe in fate, you think, well, maybe I was meant to take this journey, I don't know.
Describe the first time you met him because he said, I think I am your son. And then you met him, didn't you?
I met him a couple of hours later and
Mm.
in Caboolture at the lakes up there. I could see his wife coming. I was sitting there on the bench waiting for. I see his wife coming. I recognised her, and I didn't take much notice of the fellow that was standing next to him. And then, when they got closer, and I just like, wow, that's my son. I must admit, it was a shock because, you lose a baby and then you find out there's a 30-odd-year-old fellow coming at you. Anyway, I just said hello and gave him a bit of a hug, and he froze like he's made of steel or something. I thought, oh, I sort of like stood back and I thought, oh, maybe I've done something wrong. But he came along carrying two photos, framed photos. He picked them up as he was walking out the door, I think, of his two children. So, we sat and talked for hours, and then he came along the next day and met my mother. That's how the relationship started.
Did he talk about knowing that he was adopted or what he was told when he was growing up? Was that ever discussed between the two of you?
He wasn't told he was adopted until he was 23. That's when the laws changed, and they lined him up. Well, I don't say they lined him up, but they got him and his adopted brother to come into the house at 6 o'clock in the morning on their way to work. And then they told him, oh, by the way, you're adopted, and sign these forms so your mothers won't find you. You never know what you'll find there. So they signed the contact objections. That was and the information objection. That's why he had that 3-lettered word, I have parents, because he signed it in such a shock, in such a hurry, but he didn't know what else to say. So, the words that I tortured myself with for 8 years till I found him, and why he'd written that was just something he hurriedly put down, on finding out that he was the son of no one, that he'd been lied to for 23 years or 32 years, whatever. And yeah, so that was a big shock to him. He went out in the mornings thinking he's so and so and so and so, and the next minute he's son of no one. He'd been lied to all of his life by people who were supposed to love him and he was supposed to trust.
It's
They're
yeah,
both
it's
dead now.
Pardon?
They're both dead. His doctor parents are dead.
It would certainly rattle your world if you grew up believing one thing and then suddenly randomly you were told at 23 or as an adult, you know.
Well,
Mm.
you lose your life, don't you?
Mm.
Everything that
Whole
you've
sense
lived
of
through,
identity. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
been based on a pack of lies. People who you loved and trusted and everything else. And it hit the four of them. They adopted 4 children. I never told any of them, even though the whole street knew that they were adopted. But,
And that's worse because it's like a big conspiracy, isn't it? Like the whole street knew, but you didn't know.
well, it just goes to show you how, the community colludes with the
Mm.
lie. If you told somebody that they're adopted, and they didn't know, you'd be the worst person in the world. You broke the secret.
Mm.
You've exposed one of the worst things that people are scared of that can't have children. The fact that, they couldn't have children. They're making their lives on somebody else's loss.
What was the process about? Because at some point you ended up suing the state government and the home, or I don't know what you would describe it as, that you were uh, kept in.
I took a court action against the Sisters of Mercy that run the home, and one against the state of Queensland.
Mm.
I was advised by my barrister to settle with the Sisters of Mercy, and that's how we got the confidential agreement about the 20,000. And the barrister said to me, "Look, we don't want to be fighting two lots of you know court fees, in court. Get rid of the nuns out the way, and we'll focus on the state," which is what we did. Anyway, it took me 7 years to get them into court, and that's when I'm not exactly sure. It was in November, but the judge handed down his judgment. I think it was about the 23rd of December, a couple of days before Christmas,
Of last year.
2004.
Oh, 2004. Okay.
20 years ago.
Mm.
20 years ago, that court case. And I feel as if it just happened to me yesterday.
Mm.
The
The
judgment was
outcome.
brutal.
The outcome. Given look, I'm no lawyer, but as a layperson reading your book, the evidence that you provided was pretty, like, if the story that you wrote in the book is what you outlined in court, I was surprised that he dismissed the case. What was the reasoning for the dismissal?
Well, it was the statute of limitations, I think. And, it happened too long ago and I had an unreliable memory. But the thing is, he did not, he did not, um, you know, take into account the fact that I was a prisoner of the state, when they did those things to me. He blamed my trauma, my mental health problems on my father and, and everybody else, all these things were responsible for my psychiatric damage and not what they did to me in that home, and that's the injustice of it, where you can take a child. I'm a good prime example that you can take a child into your care like the state does. You can expose them to all the abuse in the world. And when they finally put together, what had happened to them, then you can't take them to court because for the simple reasons it's too late. What they did in my court case, right, was they hid all the. They said, I was too late in bringing a case, but I could have brought a case from the time when I discovered the injury that had happened to me. And the thing was, is I had no proof, absolutely not one sheet of paper, to even put forward as evidence, that I actually had a child, let alone, being incarcerated and everything else like that in the laundry as a state ward. They basically destroyed or hid all the evidence that I could have used, years before under their legislation by not allowing me, to even have any proof of what I was alleging. And it was only when I did start to get some pieces of paper, not many, that actually showed, that I'd given birth to a son, and the false information on their documents that they signed and whatever. Particularly with the report of investigation where the hospital is asking the state, is this baby for adoption? He spent a lot of time thinking about what that meant. And I knew exactly what it meant. It meant that the hospital was saying, is this child for adoption? They're asking the state if they're going to take it or not. They never asked me, never bothered to ask me. And they said, they said on it, will the father support? And they wrote no. And they never even bothered to find him, to find out if he would support me and the baby. They never bothered to look, but they wrote down that he wouldn't. So, there's a lot of evidence there. But the mere fact that I didn't waltz myself into jail, I didn't waltz myself into a home to be locked up and forced to work for 9 months. I didn't take my baby and hide it in a public hospital. I didn't do those things to me. The state did. They were entirely responsible for everything that happened to me. But did they take responsibility for it? No. I got a judgment that nearly killed me. And the blame for my mental health, I was just an ordinary teenager, placed, on everybody else but the people that perpetrated the crime against me. And you think to yourself, I was lucky when they offered me a settlement halfway through the court case, right, when it was starting to look pretty bad, these people that were giving evidence. And anyway, they offered me a settlement that we both walk away from, the action, and they wouldn't go me for costs. And I said, no, I want a judgment. I want this to go down in the law books. I want a judgment here. I'm not going to go away. And anyway, I was warned at the time, it mightn't be a very nice one, but I said, no, I want a judgment. And I got the judgment, all right. And my solicitor is sitting there, at the back of the courthouse, and he said, Lily, he said, I can't read you this judgment. It's just too painful. And anyway, I went home. I thought, well, I think I might go and hang myself off the clothesline out there. But I had to get over that, and sort of think, well, what's the next thing I'm going to do now that I've lost any hope of justice? I just, wait till I sort of like settled down a bit and recovered, and then decided that, we'd do a few other things as far as origins were concerned, and decided that we were going to go for a Senate inquiry, which we did do.
Were you forced to pay court costs for the state for that in that
No,
judgment?
no. When he was saying, oh, the matter was dismissed, and he said, oh, you can read my judgment, right? He was just about to get up and go, and the Crown jumped up and said, "Oh, Your Honour, we won't be pursuing costs." And I wouldn't have paid them anyway because I didn't have any money.
Mm.
I'd spent everything, $100,000 getting them into court. They took everything off me. But anyway, I didn't have any property at that time, so I had some money that I got from compensation from workers' compensation on my shoulder, and that all went into the court case. My husband put money into it, so yeah, it cost about 100,000 to get them into court.
You then went for the Senate inquiry, which was a juggernaut, it turns out, of a feat to get to happen. Explain that process to me.
Well, after Diane Welfare died, we just thought, well, what next? And anyway, I thought, well, we need to get a Senate inquiry into all of this.
So you
So
have to just
anyway,
explain. Diane was she
Diane
worked
was
with.
yeah, she was the founder of Origins, and she'd passed away. She actually her and I took another court case um, for her, about the fraudulent concealment of what they were doing. She'd already lost one court case, and then she took another one. She lost that. So she's lost 2 court cases and a number of appeals. But anyway, she passed away, and I got stuck with more or less looking after her legacy.
And
Got the poison
what was,
chalice.
for those that haven't read the book, you'll have to explain what Origins is.
Well, it was an independent organisation that supported people separated by adoption. It started off with a few women, and it grew into quite a large group of women in an independent organisation. So, they were more very politically active, and, called about getting an inquiry in New South Wales, right, in 1998, that handed down a report in 2000 that practices in New South Wales were unlawful. And then, after I lost my court case and everything else, I thought, well, the next best thing we need to do is we need to go for a Senate inquiry. And then we started lobbying and that, to politicians and to put it on the floor of the Senate. Anyway, it took a long while. It was about 12 years or something, you know, going backwards and forwards. And I'd been involved with the Forgotten Australians and the Stolen Generation. I'd been involved with them as well. So saw them, through their apologies and everything, after a Senate inquiry. And we were jumping up and down, and there was people jumping up and down wanting an apology. And we said, no, we don't want an apology. We kept rejecting it. We want a Senate inquiry because those other groups had a Senate inquiry and they had their own report. But the thing was, it's funny because not long after, because I've been involved with the Forgotten Australians, not long after the Senate inquiry, they took us to Canberra. The minister took us to Canberra. And anyway, wanted to have a talk to us. The Committee for Origins wanted to have a talk to us about what did we want, because we were making a noise. What do you want? We said, well, we want a Senate inquiry. Anyway, we went back to Sydney, and the next day they rang me up and they said, Lily, we've talked about it and we've decided we want to add you, the mothers that lost children to adoption, to the Forgotten Australians apology. And I said, no. I said, no way. I will knock it back and I'll make sure we make a fuss if you tried that one, because you're trying to sneak us in through the back door, to finishing us off. We wanted to send an inquiry. I said, I can't do that. These other people have had their opportunity of telling their stories. Mothers deserve the same treatment as the other groups. So anyway, they did went ahead with the Forgotten Australians apology, and a while later, we put this group that was running around looking for an apology, put a national apology on the Senate table, and it was voted down. And I'd been to see Tony Abbott and a few other politicians as well, and had a talk to them and asked him if he'd support, in the Senate, the call for a Senate inquiry. He said yes, he would. So um, Senator Rachel Seward promised that, if the apology failed, then she'd put the call for a Senate inquiry onto the table, and they voted on it, and we got it. I was travelling around with the Stolen Generations at the time. I was the national co-chair of the National Stolen Generations Alliance, and it was like I can't remember where we were. I think we might have been in Victoria or somewhere, and they told us, yes, you've got a Senate inquiry, and the adopted Aboriginal, people that were in the alliance were jumping up and down. They were so happy, that they had their opportunity to be able to tell their stories, and you know, they weren't able to put their stuff into the Stolen Generations, uh, you know, bringing them home, whatever at the time. So they jumped at the opportunity of having this inquiry about their adoptions, which was happening. Then we went on to the Senate inquiry, and that followed with an apology from Julia Gillard.
So the outcome of the Senate inquiry was what?
Well, it's coming up for 12 years now, isn't it? For you want me to? I didn't want an apology before I found out what the framework was going to be. Was it going to be redress? Was it going to be, all the rest of it? And then an apology. And the thing was, when they said that we were going to do an apology, and these committees were going to organise it and do the framework at the same time. It's sort of like, well, we'll just wait and see, because I'd already been in a position of having a bird's eye view of what happened with the Stolen Generations and the Forgotten Australians. I'd sort of been in both camps at that particular time, so I met an awful lot of Stolen Generations in my journey, going around Australia. And anyway, the apology was hijacked on the very day that Julia Gillard gave it. And we're sitting on the front lawn of Parliament House, with the marquees and the food and everything. Journalists were taking down stories of mothers and that. And then all of a sudden they started rushing up the hill to Parliament House. And they'd done a leadership challenge on the very day of a precedent event that never happened anywhere else in the world. A day where a government apologised for the most worst human rights crimes that you could commit against young women and their children. And they decided that they're going to have a leadership challenge. And people were actually fainting on the grounds of Parliament House, just the shock of it. And I thought to myself, well, so much for the apology. It turned into a bloody circus. And just like, well, and you can't describe the disgusting thing, that happened that day. And they held it on a day of, what sort of day? A Harmony Day, where everybody was, included. It's a day of inclusion. They held our apology to one of the worst human rights crimes committed in this country on a day where they celebrated, inclusion and harmony. So if there wasn't something very cynical about that, I'd have to go and see somebody to get my head tested. But the thing was, that was it. That was, my grandson was in Germany at the airport watching that national apology. It went all over the world. We had journalists from England, America, and all over the place. Al Jazeera and everything were interviewing us. And they did that. And it was like, well, this is a taste of what's to come, isn't it? And I find out when they were doing a study going along the same time as the Senate inquiry from the Institute of Family Studies that this was going to more or less set the framework for what happened after the apology. So anyway, it turns out that Relationships Australia got all the funding except for one state to manage forced adoption, and Jigsaw in Queensland got funding to look after people in Queensland. So of course I had to go and train the people from Relationships Australia in Sydney to actually inform them of what actually was forced adoption because they didn't know what the hell it was all about.
So why did they get the funding? Who is that organisation? What do they do?
Well, they used to be a marriage guidance counselling organisation, but they must have branched out somewhere along the line. Who knows? But they do have links back to the Commonwealth, which I just can't go into,
Fair
you
enough.
know. But the thing is, we were used. Our organisation was used not only to, get the uh, news of the Senate inquiry out there so that we could get submissions coming in and everything. We were used. They used our resources to get people to become involved in the Institute of Family Studies report. We were used to get people to be involved in the National Archives exhibition. You know, we were sending out all these invitations, spent 4 days putting together the stuff for the National Archives exhibit, you know, and we didn't even hardly rate a mention. They did, and same with the Institute of Family Studies. Made well and truly sure that we didn't get any funding because they never recognised us as an adoption support organisation, even though we had, the Incorporated Association and DGR status and the rest of it. No different from any other organisation. They use this to promote them and get these questionnaires and that out to people. So they've used us for our research. They've used us to have access to our membership database, over 1,000 odd people, you know, and then, they say, oh, well, um, we can't give people like them funding because, well, I'm still asking the question why. If we were good enough to provide research, submissions, everything else, that carried that Senate inquiry, then why weren't we good enough to determine our own self-empowerment? That we have to have these people patting us on the head and saying, oh, that must have been very, very sad for you, my dear. And that's the sort of follow-up that, people are getting from these organisations that are funded to keep them quiet.
What year are we in now that funding was released?
Well, it came about as a result of the apology, didn't it? So how long's that been? What? Coming up 12, 2013, 12 years?
Hmm.
So you know what you do? You exploit your victims, you exploit the victims, and then you reward the people that, were part of the problem. You don't give victims self-empowerment. You keep them quiet and hope they'll shut up and go away. And unfortunately, I just haven't been able to quite do that.
I love that, Lily. I love that you won't go away. Like, what's the goal now? So you had the Senate inquiry, there was the apology, the funding did not go where you would have liked it to go. What's the goal now in terms of for you?
For me,
Mm,
to get some
yeah,
justice, oh,
yeah.
I just took my case to the United Nations Commissioner on Human Rights because I can't get any justice in this country.
Oh God, it's
I
so
haven't
sad
had
that
one
you've had to do
sincere,
that.
well, I haven't had one sincere acknowledgement of the harm that they've caused me and all those other mothers and our children that they've damaged for the rest of their life. And the fact that, the crime that they committed against us goes down to every future generation of mine, and every other mother. But, our children are tacked onto the trees of complete strangers, had their sense of identity stolen off them, their history, their ancestry, their religion, their culture, their family. It carries on from when I'm looking at my fourth generation of grandchildren now that, don't even know who they are, where they belong in. No one had the right to do that to me and to mine. And, and the thing at the end of the day is, well, you know, I probably would go to every length that I could possibly go to say, you had no right to do this to me. You had no right to do it to anyone. That, a vulnerable young woman goes into hospital, faces a situation between life and death, and you mutilate her and you steal her baby off her, treat her less than an animal, because at least an animal gets to nurture their young until they grow up and look after themselves. But you did that to a human being, you know, that carry this, right through to their dying day. And that gets passed on to our children. The trauma that they inflicted, on our babies. My son was laying in a bassinet in the hospital for 16 days before someone took him and picked him up and took him home. So, what damage that did to him, it's unbelievable. You can't even comprehend that anyone could do that to a newborn. And as far as my son is concerned, the way that, it has affected him certainly makes me more determined to actually, I don't know if you can ever right a wrong, but at least, let people know how you feel about it.
So you're going to an international court. Where are you at with that now?
I've put my complaint in,
Mm-hmm.
and I've made a complaint against the Commonwealth of Australia and the state of Queensland and the Catholic Church. They all worked in collusion, with each other to, see what was done to me.
Do we
And,
have to say,
and
for
that,
legal purposes, allegedly acted in collusion?
well, allegedly acted in
Okay.
collusion.
Okay.
But the strings are definitely there. But the thing at the end of the day is my thought on the matter is that, I was a citizen of the Commonwealth. I was just a resident of the state. So as a citizen of the Commonwealth, I had the right to have my legal rights protected, from the criminal actions of the state. So, as far as the Commonwealth is concerned, they oversaw the states breaching the common law and did nothing about it. And the common law is, overarching over state law.
Mm.
You cannot steal people's children in public hospitals and get away with it. And the Commonwealth was well and truly, like in the loop. They were meeting with the states from the 1950s to discuss what was going on every year with all the directors from each state, child welfare, talking about, adoption and uniform adoption legislation for bloody decades. For
And
decades, they
that's
were all
and that's
working
all
together.
and that's all evidenced in public record?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's when they brought out the terms of reference, for the Senate inquiry. There was only two of them. One was the first one was what was the Commonwealth's role in respect of forced adoption practice policy or whatever. The second one, what sort of framework to follow. I mean, just two terms of reference. But the first one was like, how are you going to prove that the Commonwealth was involved in all of this? Well, the thing was is I just accidentally came across something years ago in the directors' reports to the Queensland Parliament that they'd been working with the Commonwealth and with New Zealand and New Guinea on uniform adoption legislation since the 1950s. So they were well abreast of, I've got some of their minutes actually, of what they were discussing in Canberra. So they were well and truly involved with what was going on within the states. They were meeting with them. And that's why they couldn't fully get out of it.
I
Um,
just don't understand why you've had to go. Like, to me, as a layperson, right, not understanding the law, I look at this and I say, how is this being dismissed in our courts? That I don't understand. I don't understand that someone would have to go to the lengths that you're going to just for. It doesn't make any rhyme or reason
Justice?
to me.
Just for some
Yeah,
justice?
justice. Yes, that's the word that I was looking for. Yeah.
I don't know that you'll ever find any justice, to be honest. Why would they go to such lengths when you think about the costs? I mean, what they've done to us, the floodgates would be immense. And I knew if I won my court case right, it would set a precedent for the stolen generation. It would set a precedent for the forgotten Australians and every other, mother like myself.
Well, I wondered whether
I
or not
was
the stolen
doomed to
generation.
fail.
I wondered whether or not the stolen generation actually set a precedent for your case.
Well, it's possible when they dismiss the Cabillo and the other you know people that sued in the Song Generations case. But I mean, it was a different. I mean, we were a different group altogether
Mm.
because they legislated what they did to these people. They legislated what they did to the stolen generation. They with the forgotten Australians. They got these children through the Child Welfare Acts and whatever, from neglect or abuse or whatever. But with ours, they did not legislate to steal our children in the labour wards across the country. There was no law that
So there's no
legislated
written, no like black and white
no
written.
written law that
Right.
so they could do that.
For those
And
that
this
are.
is why we were always the most dangerous group, out of, I suppose, in one sense, because of that, because they didn't bring in legislation or acts or anything else to do this to people. But they certainly used the adoption legislation to cover up their crimes. That's why I say it's a crime a country tried to hide. But when they opened up the records and people could actually see what had been done to them, like that was when all hell broke loose.
So for those that are listening that are outside of Australia and you're wondering what we're talking about for the stolen generation, um, it was a horrific atrocities upon the Aboriginal people of Australia, and they basically took their kids, a whole generation of kids. They deemed that they weren't worthy of raising their own children, and they took them. In layman's terms, would you say that that would be basically what happened?
That's basically what happened. They're trying to integrate the, Aboriginal children into white society or whatever, and that I mean, let's face it, I mean, the country was quite racist back in those days and probably still
Mm.
is to a certain degree now anyway. But, I mean, it's you can't think of the mindset that was going on with some of these people if you look back at their practices, over the years. You think, how could they possibly do that? But if you put it all together, right? If you put all these numbers of children that were taken from their parents, and put into homes, orphanages, missions, whatever, forced adoption, foster care, you're looking at when, round about the 1950, late 1950s, about a population of about 10 million or something, maybe 12 million, 13 million, something like that, round about 1967. Almost a million children had been taken from their parents. A million, I would say conservatively, at least a million children, if you take into consideration, say, 500 odd thousand um, estimated kids with the forgotten Australians, if you add up all the numbers for adoption, adoption before and after 1910, you're probably looking around about, oh, at least close to about 500,000 if you go back, before the First World War. So you're looking at, 'cause conservatively, so nearly a million children were separated from their parents, brought up in, homes, orphanages, other people, foster care, you name it. So we're a country that's been built on the misery of, you know, children that have been separated, removed, families being broken, and everything else like that. So it's pretty horrific when you think about it. There's no
Yeah.
value really for, the value of family. Just people just think, you know, I don't know what they were thinking of.
I think it's also indication of a mindset of I don't know. I don't know if you could speak to
The
it, but
deserving, the non-deserving, the fit, the unfit.
no, it's
You know,
almost like the governmental state knows best, and so therefore you don't have a voice because what do you know? You know what I mean? Like how like they make that moral judgment call and you don't have a say. From reading your book, that's how it comes across.
well, there was a nice little piece in it, you could call it that, where the departmental worker that was dear friends with the woman who took my consent was
Mm.
asked in evidence, "What did you do with people like Lily when they came into the hospital?" And she says, "Oh, well, we just put them into the too hard basket." And you know something? That's why they threw my life into the too hard basket instead of opening the door and let me go and live my life with my son's father, a man who I grieved over for bloody 40 years, and my baby. That would have been an easy solution to the too hard basket that left my life in ruins and, it took me nearly a lifetime. I'm 75 in March, a lifetime of carrying this monkey around on my back.
Given the fact that you're 75, how long do you think until you see your day in court in the international uh, setting?
Well, I don't know. I suppose the wheels of justice roll very slowly, but
Mm.
I mean, when you look at what's going on in the world, with all the other countries and the forced adoption of all the children from the Ukraine and all this sort of thing that's going on, child stealing is still in full swing in, certain parts of the world. But, I mean, maybe just a voice in the wilderness. I don't know. But the thing at the end of the day is, you know, I don't know what the outcome will be. But I think to myself, if I hadn't have, I mean, there's no point in me taking my crusade or whatever it is to politicians in this country. They run when they see you coming, and the thing, they're totally well. I don't know whether I should call it indifferent or whatever the story is, but there's a determination, not to deal with this. They just want us all to die and go away. But hopefully, our children that were adopted to be jumping up and down. We're setting a precedent for the world, what we're doing here in Australia. I mean, other countries are following our lead. There was an apology in Wales. I've been working with the Scottish people and the English people over there. The Scots have had a national apology. We've got origins in Canada and United States. We're an international group of people. So, somewhere along the line, they got to feel like, there's going to be some justice or accountability, or maybe when governments start, respecting the concept of families, maybe the world might be a happier place and we all might start looking after one another. But, you know, I'm just on my own little crusade. Uh, A girl's got to do something, I suppose, with her old age.
Gotta fill in a day somehow. I think
Well,
it's a worthy crusade, Lily. Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you'd like to say?
probably would have said a lot of it in my book, but there's a lot
You
that I
have.
haven't said. You can say that, wait till you read the rest of it, and there's more to come.
Have you got another
Maybe
book coming out after this?
I'm working on a book at the moment, but it's more like a close personal thing. Well, not that that's not personal with the
It's very
with the
personal, this
prisoner
one.
of the state, but this is
Yeah.
more intimately done. With like the destruction of a family, how you can destroy somebody's family. But anyway, I'm still working on that. It's going to take me a while to get around to that one. hopefully I'm still alive by that time anyway.
I'm sure you'll live
You know,
many
I'm
years to
approaching
come,
my
Lily.
I'm approaching my demise, aren't I?
No,
75.
you're not. The book is Prisoner of the State. Lily Arthur, it was an incredible read. You're the most resilient individual that I can't imagine what you've had to go through. Keep fighting the good fight, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Thanks for spending time with me.
Pleasure. The One Moment Please podcast.
Yeah.